Jesus had taken Peter, James and John up a mountain where he'd been transfigured before them, and was explaining to them the fact that he would be betrayed, handed over to the Jewish authorities, who would condemn him to death and hand him over to the Gentile authorities for execution. We continue the story from Matthew chapter 17, verse 14. When they got back down the mountain and came to the other disciples, a man came to Jesus, kneeling down to him and saying, "Lord, have mercy on my son, for he is epileptic and suffers severely, for he often falls into the fire and often into the water. So I brought him to your disciples, but they could not cure him." Then Jesus answered and said, "Faithless and perverse generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I bear with you? Bring him here to me." And Jesus rebuked the demon, and it came out of him, and the child was cured from that very hour. Then the disciples came to Jesus privately and said, "Why could we not cast it out?" So Jesus said to them, "Because of your unbelief. For assuredly I say to you that if you have faith as a mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, 'Move from here to there,' and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you. However, this kind does not come out except by prayer and fasting." May the Lord bless these words to us as we meditate on them. Things had changed for the disciples. When Jesus announced to them that rather than being exalted to the throne of Israel, he, as the Messiah, was going to be crucified, they didn't understand it. They didn't accept it. And so their confidence was somewhat shattered. Consequently, an element of unbelief entered into them. And so this is what Jesus explains to them. You couldn't cast out this demon because there was unbelief. Things had changed when Jesus told them that he would be rejected, spat upon, betrayed, scourged, and ultimately killed. Mark gives us a few more details of this incident in Mark chapter 9. When he came to the disciples, Mark says, he saw a great multitude around them and scribes disputing with them. Immediately when they saw him, all the people were greatly amazed, and running to him greeted him. And he said to the scribes, "What are you discussing with them?" Then one of the crowd answered and said, "Teacher, I brought you my son. He has a mute spirit. Whenever it seizes him, it throws him down. He foams at the mouth, gnashes his teeth, and becomes rigid. So I spoke to your disciples that they should cast it out, but they could not." He answered him and said, "O faithless generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I bear with you? Bring him to me." Then they brought him to him, and when he saw him, immediately the spirit convulsed him, and he fell on the ground and wallowed, foaming at the mouth. So he asked his father, "How long has this been happening to him?" And he said, "From childhood. And often he has thrown him both into the fire and into the water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us." Jesus said to him, "If you can believe, all things are possible to him who believes." Immediately the father of the child cried out and said with tears, "Lord, I believe, help my unbelief." When Jesus saw that the people were running together, he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to him, "Deaf and dumb spirit, I command you, come out of him and enter him no more." Then the spirit cried out, convulsed him greatly, and came out of him. And he became as one dead, so that many said, "He's dead." But Jesus took him by the hand, lifted him up, and he arose. And when he had come into the house, his disciples asked him privately, "Why could we not cast it out?" So he said to them, "This kind can come out by nothing but prayer and fasting." So in both accounts we have an emphasis on belief and unbelief. We have the belief of the Father who brought his Son to Jesus, but the unbelief of the disciples, because they were no longer sure of exactly what was going to happen in relation to the Lord Jesus. The New King James translates the condition of the Son as epileptic, but the Greek word is not epileptic, it is moonstruck, and Mark says it was a mute spirit. So the Father, the scribes, the disciples, and Jesus all recognized this was a spiritual problem. It wasn't epilepsy as we know epilepsy. This evil spirit, we learn, was deaf and dumb. In both accounts, Jesus complains about a faithless and perverse generation. How long shall I bear with you? Bring him here to me. Our lack of faith is a frustration to the Lord Jesus. It doesn't mean that he refuses to help us, but it is a frustration, just as we get frustrated when we can see that somebody should do something, should believe that they can do something and get on with it, but they seem to be unable to do it. Jesus rebuked the demon, and it came out of him immediately. So Jesus' authority remains over the evil spirits. There are many things that we do not understand, but the Bible makes it plain that there is a spiritual world that we can't see, which has great influences on life, on our lives. And the only way to respond to this spiritual world is to have great faith in God and great belief in God, and not to doubt God even though we do not understand what he's doing. So the disciples had an element of doubt because they couldn't understand why the Messiah would die. They couldn't accept, and indeed, as the story goes on, we see they did not accept the proposition, even though Jesus told it to them frequently. And so they quizzed Jesus, why could we not do it? There's two comments that Jesus makes. First of all, he says, I say, if you have faith as a mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you. Well, that's a most incredible statement, and it is repeated several times in the scriptures. So we know that Jesus said it, but what on earth does it mean? In Mark's Gospel, chapter 11, where Jesus made this statement in connection with the cursing of the fig tree, we read from verse 22, Jesus answered and said, have faith in God. Assuredly I say to you, whoever says to this mountain, be removed and cast into the sea, and does not doubt in his heart, but believes that those things he says will be done, he will have whatever he says. Therefore I say to you, whatever things you ask when you pray, believe that you receive them, and you will have them. Whenever you stand praying, if you have anything against anyone, forgive him, that your Father in heaven may also forgive you your trespasses. And if you do not forgive, neither will your Father in heaven forgive you your trespasses. So, first of all, we must believe and not doubt. So, you can ask for anything, but you must believe it is God's will. You must be absolutely sure that it is God's will. If we ask for something ridiculous, then we know that it's ridiculous and we don't have that confidence, and it doesn't happen. There are several passages which talk about God answering our prayer, especially in John 15 and 1 John 5. The bottom line is that we must discern what the Father's will is and pray according to his will. But also we need to be forgiven, and that means we must forgive others. James says the person who doubts will receive nothing from the Lord. But the second thing Jesus says in Matthew's account is that this kind does not come out but by prayer and fasting. We need to depend on the Father when we come in prayer before him. We need to seek the Father's face with absolute confidence in God to move the mountains that confront us. Lord, I believe. Help my unbelief.